She was 14 when she ran into the night barefoot, heart pounding, a baby pressed tight to her chest. Behind her, silence, fear, and a locked bedroom door that had never protected her. Ahead, a frozen road, a bus station that didn't ask questions, and a world that didn't know her name. But Emily Carter didn't just escape a house. She broke a cycle. She became a quiet force, building a place where other women could walk in and finally exhale. But freedom always comes at a cost, and healing. That's the hardest part. This is not a story about pain. It's a story about what comes after. And the girl who made it out. Part 1. The quiet beginning. The town of Dovewood rested between a quiet river and a ridge of tired hills. It was the kind of place where time drifted instead of passed, where porches creaked with stories never told aloud. The Carter home sat on the town's edge, a weathered clapboard house with peeling white paint and a sagging front step. Its roof bowed slightly like it, too, was weary of watching the seasons come and go. A vegetable patch stretched behind it. Though the soil was more stubborn than fertile, a few chickens pecked at dry ground near a rusted shed. Inside, wallpaper curled at the corners, and the air always carried the scent of vinegar, wood smoke, and something faintly medicinal. 7-year-old Emily Carter knew every creak of its floorboards. She kept to the corners, small and soft-spoken, with wide, thoughtful eyes that often studied the world as if it might someday explain itself. Her mother, Margaret, still told bedtime stories. Then her voice quiet but warm. On summer evenings, they would snap beans on the porch. Margaret's hands were quick, her fingers worn. Emily would listen to her hum, a tune with no name. Sometimes, Nathan would tumble into their space, tossing a pine cone like it was a football, laughing, calling Emily Bug, and ruffling her hair. But those moments didn't last. Henry Carter, once a stern but silent man, began changing after the factory where he worked started cutting hours. He'd sit longer on the porch, a bottle by his chair. At first, it was muttering, then shouting, then fists on the table. Margaret tried to soften the edges, setting meals earlier, keeping the children quieter. She wore more powder on her cheeks, but it couldn't hide the bruises beneath her collar. Nathan changed, too. At 13, he grew tall fast. Too fast. And when Henry looked at him, it was with pride. Strong boy. Finally got someone worth the Carter name. Emily faded in their eyes. She was too sensitive. Too quiet. The first time it happened, Emily was chasing a stray chicken behind the barn. Nathan had followed her out. His tone was playful, almost like a game. But when he pulled her close, his grip too tight, she froze. He told her not to tell. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And for a moment, she wondered if he was scared. Too, it wasn't until the third or fourth time that Emily learned how silence could feel like choking. She would sit on her bed afterward, pulling the blanket to her chin, whispering fairy tales to herself. It was the only way she could still sleep. Margaret must have known. She paused too long outside Emily's door. Her hands trembled when she folded her daughter's laundry. She fought with herself daily between fear and responsibility. Henry's threats were real, but so was her love for her children. Every inaction became another weight on her chest. Her silence wasn't indifference, it was survival, but it came at a cost she would carry forever. By 12, Emily knew how to step lightly, how to disappear into a room. Nathan had grown colder, cockier. He sneered more. Henry's drinking worsened. He stopped asking about school and only noticed Emily when she was in his way. At 14, Emily missed her period. Then the next. One morning, she vomited behind the woodshed. Margaret saw her pale face and cornered her in the kitchen that night. "Is there something you need to tell me?" she asked, voice shaking. Emily broke down. Her sobs came in waves. Margaret held her, rocking back and forth on the floor. That night, Margaret packed a small bag. A bus schedule was stuffed into her apron pockets. She told Emily to be quiet, to wait until Henry and Nathan left for the lumber auction. But Henry came home early. The argument was a storm, shouting, a slap, something heavy breaking. Margaret screamed, not from pain but rage. Henry hit her, hard. Emily tried to shield her, but he pushed the girl into the wall. The next morning, Margaret's eye was swollen shut. Emily was locked in her room with a bucket and a plate of bread. Weeks passed. No one spoke of the baby, but Emily felt it growing. Quiet, secret. Margaret snuck her vitamins, whispered advice through the door. Keep breathing. You're stronger than you think. Then came Eloise Hargrave. She was the church secretary. She passed the Carter house each Sunday, her wide-brimmed hat shading sharp, observant eyes. She noticed Margaret missing quiet. She noticed Emily, thinner and pale, hanging laundry with trembling hands. Once, she saw Henry throw something into the yard and shout. Another time, she found a small basket of broken eggs by the gate and quietly replaced it with bread, bandages, and a bottle of cod liver oil. One rainy afternoon, she knocked. Margaret opened the door, bruises half concealed. Eloise said nothing. She just held up a warm pie and stepped inside. The baby came early. A storm raged outside. Emily screamed into a towel. Margaret helped as best she could. When Michael was born, Emily stared at him, trembling. She was terrified. But when his tiny hand curled around her finger, something inside her shifted. Not erased, not healed, but rooted. Henry refused to touch the child. That thing's not mine, Nathan smirked. But he's still ours, right? Emily wrapped Michael tighter. For months, Emily planned. She noted when Henry drank himself asleep. When Nathan went out late, she gathered spare change from under cushions, a baby bottle from Eloise, a cloth sling she sewed herself. In her journal, she sketched maps routes out of dovewood, trains she might catch. One night, Michael cried too loud. Henry pounded on the door. Emily held him, whispering, just a little longer, sweetheart, a little longer. And when the night came cold, moonless, quiet, she slipped out barefoot, Michael against her chest, a satchel over her shoulder. Her breath trembled in the dark. She didn't know where the road would lead, only that she couldn't go back. Henry laughed when he saw the kids together. Look at that. That's a close family. He thumped Nathan's back with pride. Real man in the making. Emily started sleeping facing the wall. By 9, she'd stopped playing outside. Her drawings disappeared from the fridge. Her laughter, once rare but bright, faded. At school, she spoke only when called on. Her teachers noted the change. But in Dovewood, people didn't ask too many questions. Nathan had become bold. He walked in while she changed, watched her too long at dinner, said things like, "You're growing up fast." Emily started locking doors, hiding under oversized shirts, sleeping in jeans. It didn't stop him. When Margaret noticed the bathroom door off its hinge, she blamed the humidity. Henry blamed Emily, always breaking things, he muttered, just like a girl. At 11, Emily received her first birthday gift from Nathan, a plastic necklace and a hug that wouldn't end. That night, he didn't just watch, he didn't just whisper, and Emily learned how to survive in stillness. The next morning, she walked differently, sat carefully. Margaret saw it, asked about it. Emily lied. I tripped on the stairs. Margaret brought her a cloth soaked in witch hazel, dabbed her gently. Tears ran silently down her face. She never asked again. Nights became a cruel routine. 2 or 3 times a week. Nathan would wait until the house slept. He'd enter quietly, speak softly, lie beside her. Emily learned how to disappear from her own body, how to drift far enough away to forget her name. Henry, unaware or unwilling, continued to brag. Nathan's a man now, he'd say, sharp as a knife, stronger than I was at that age. Emily stopped looking in mirrors. She began to shrink, not in size, but in spirit. The world dulled. Food lost its taste. Her voice retreated somewhere deep, where no one could reach. At 14, her mother baked her a strawberry jam cake. Nathan gave her a card with glitter. That night, it happened again, but this time, something broke inside her, a part that would never quite heal. A month later, Margaret noticed the signs, the missed period, the morning sickness, the heaviness Emily carried. Emily, she asked softly, is there something you need to tell me? Emily couldn't speak. She just nodded. Margaret understood. She always had. She packed 2 bags, folded 2 dresses, filled a jar with coins she'd been saving for years. We're leaving tonight, she whispered, before your father comes home, but they didn't make it. Henry came back early, saw the bags by the door, saw Margaret's trembling hands, saw Emily clutching her belly. What is this? He demanded. Margaret stepped in front of Emily. We're leaving. Henry, no, you're not. He hit Margaret hard. She fell against the wall. Emily didn't scream. Henry pointed to the stairs. Go to your room, now. Emily obeyed. From that night on, The locks disappeared. The windows were nailed shut. Emily wasn't a daughter anymore. She was a prisoner, and Nathan still had a key to her door. The walls of that house were thin, but the silence was thicker. Margaret limped through each day like a ghost, never meeting Emily's eyes. At night, she folded clothes that didn't fit anymore, hummed lullabies from a time when everything was still innocent. Emily's belly grew, so did the weight on her soul. The Carter household became quieter with each passing day. The only sound that filled the space came from the old radio in the kitchen, usually tuned to local sermons or war updates. Even that seemed like background noise to the grief pulsing beneath the floorboards. Emily spent her mornings pretending not to feel sick. Her afternoons curled in corners, trying to will the hours to pass. Her nights were measured in door creaks and how long Nathan would linger. And through it all, she waited for a moment, for a crack, for some invisible hand to pull her out of the life she never chose. Outside, the world went on. Kids played ball in the dust. Women hung laundry in the breeze. But nobody knocked, nobody asked, nobody saw, and Emily, 14 and 4 months pregnant, disappeared deeper into herself. By winter, Margaret had quietly begun saving bits of food, stashing slices of bread behind jars, squirreling away dried beans and canned peaches. It was her way of resisting, however small, of preparing for something, anything that might offer escape. She tried to care for Emily in secret, warm rags for her ankles, homemade tea for the nausea, oil rubbed gently across her stretched skin. But her hands always trembled. Nathan barely noticed the change, or perhaps he did and didn't care. He continued as he always had entitled, invisible to consequence. One night, after Henry drank himself into a stupor, Nathan whispered as he hovered by the door, "You're still mine. Baby or not?" Emily didn't answer. She stared at the ceiling, counted the paint chips. She'd already memorized where the water leaked after storms, the exact corner that creaked when someone stepped wrong. She knew her cage better than most people knew their freedom. She wondered what her child would be, who he might become, and whether a person born from violence could ever live without it. Outside, Dovewood slept. Inside, Emily waited, and the silence never broke. But the days crept forward. Emily's body changed faster than her mind could follow. By early spring, she could no longer hide the bump. The curves beneath her dresses had transformed into undeniable proof. Her father barely looked at her anymore. Her mother moved through the house like a whisper. One afternoon, Margaret slipped her an old shawl. "Wear this," she said. "It's still cold." Emily understood. It wasn't for the weather. At school, questions mounted. Whispers grew louder. Emily said little. She clutched her books close to her chest and stared at the floor. When a teacher asked if everything was okay at home, she nodded, the same way she always did. She started skipping lunch. The stares in the cafeteria were worse than the hunger. Nathan, still smug, still untouched, told neighbors that Emily was going through a phase. The shame wrapped around her like a second skin. By April, the whispers reached the church pews. Families stopped inviting the Carters to Sunday dinners. Emily was moved to the back row. The pastor gave sermons about sin and modesty with a voice louder than usual. And still, Margaret said nothing. Emily lay awake at night, hands on her stomach, feeling the flutter of life that didn't ask to be born. She whispered promises in the dark, that it would never know the pain she knew, that she would find a way to protect it, even if it meant dying to do so. And as May approached, the shadows in Dovewood lengthened. Summer loomed, but warmth never touched that house again. Emily Carter, barely 14, was no longer a child. She was a mother, and still no one came, and no one knocked. But someone was watching. Across the road lived Mrs. Eloise Hargrave, a widow in her 60s who rarely left her porch but never missed a detail. She'd seen Emily walk with her eyes fixed on the ground, seen Margaret hang clothes without humming like she used to, seen Nathan, older now, strut like a rooster while Emily's body bent further inward with each passing week. Mrs. Hargrave had no children of her own, but she knew the shape of a girl's sorrow. She had worn that same shape once, long ago, and buried it under layers of "it was a different time," and nobody would have believed me anyway. One Tuesday afternoon, she crossed the road with a basket of muffins and knocked on the Carter's front door. Margaret answered, her eyes darting behind her. "We're not buying anything." "I know, honey," Mrs. Hargrave said gently. These are a gift. For the girl. Margaret hesitated, then reached for the basket. She's resting. I imagine she is. Mrs. Hargrave replied, her voice steady. You take care now. She left a card in the basket. Just a name and a phone number. Emily found it later, slipped it under her pillow. She never called, but just knowing someone had noticed was enough to let her breathe that night. Days passed, then weeks. By June, her belly was a globe. She could no longer hide behind dresses or pretend the world hadn't shifted under her feet. At the grocery store, women stared, men whispered, children pointed. Henry stopped taking her in public. You're an embarrassment, he spat one evening. You should be grateful I still let you eat at my table. Nathan said nothing, just smiled. Emily started counting days by the weight of her limbs. Some days, her body felt like a sandbag she had to drag behind her. Other days, it was her mind that collapsed, folding under memories she never wanted. Margaret rarely left her side now. She sat quietly by the bedroom window, mending torn sheets or unraveling the same hem over and over. She didn't say much, but her presence was like a thread barely holding the two of them together. Late one night, Margaret finally broke the silence. You were supposed to be my second chance, she whispered. Emily didn't respond. You and I, we both deserved better. Outside, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked across the Dovewood sky. This time, Nathan didn't come into the room. The next morning, Emily woke to find the door still shut, locked. The silence was almost louder than his footsteps used to be. The baby was coming. It started with a cramp so sharp she doubled over. She called for her mother. Margaret rushed in, her hands already shaking. It's too soon. Emily gasped. Margaret shook her head. He's ready. No hospital, no doctor, only an old bucket of rags, hot water, and a mother whose own voice trembled as much as her daughter's. Labour lasted hours. The pain stole time. Margaret coached her through it, holding her hand, brushing hair from her sweat-soaked face. You're strong, she kept repeating. You're stronger than I ever was. Emily wanted to believe her. When the baby finally came, it was quiet, too quiet. Then, a gasp, a wail. A boy, small, warm, and blinking with eyes that were too green to ignore. Margaret wrapped him in an old towel. She didn't say a word as she handed him to Emily. He was real. He was hers. Emily held him close, her breath shaking. I'll protect you, she whispered. The baby curled into her chest. And for the first time in years, Emily cried not from pain, not from fear, but from something closer to love. It wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. But something had started. Something new. She named him Michael. Not after anyone. Just something simple. Strong. A name that felt like a clean slate. She rocked him to sleep as sunlight crept across the bedroom walls. In the quiet, the name felt like a whisper of hope. Margaret found a crib left out by a neighbour, half rotted, but still standing. She scrubbed it with hot water and vinegar, painted it white. It sat next to Emily's bed like a fragile declaration that life would, somehow, go on. At night, Emily lay awake listening to Michael's breath. When he stirred, she fed him. When he cried, she held him. In those moments, she didn't feel like a child anymore. She felt like a mother. But Henry didn't acknowledge the baby. He walked past the crib without glancing down. If Michael cried, he turned up the radio. Margaret tried to keep things calm. Dinner on time. No sudden noises. But it was like living on top of a fault line, where the earth could split open with no warning. Nathan, though, did notice. He watched Michael with a strange mix of possession and distance. Sometimes, he'd stand in the doorway of the bedroom and just stare. He looks like me, he said once. Emily didn't reply. He's mine. You know, he's mine, she whispered back. Nathan laughed. A low, bitter sound. We'll see. Emily tightened her hold on Michael. She didn't trust locks. She barely trusted walls, but she trusted herself now, trusted the fire inside her. Lit the day he was born. She began to plan, not escape. Not yet. That would come later. First, she gathered information. How much a bus ticket cost. How long it took to reach Atlanta. Which neighbours left their garages unlocked. Which nights Henry drank too much to notice. Mrs. Hargrave started leaving small things at the doorstep. A can of formula, a package of wipes, a blanket that smelled like lavender. Emily never spoke to her, but each item felt like a whispered promise. You are not alone. She stored away what she could. She drew maps in her head. She practiced waking, dressing, and leaving in under 5 minutes. Emily didn't hope for miracles anymore. She was learning to make them, and someday soon, she would. Part 2. The unbreakable silence. Emily ran through the darkness. Michael pressed tightly to her chest. The road to Haviland stretched longer than she'd imagined. With each footstep, she felt the ache in her legs, the rawness in her throat, but she didn't stop. At the edge of town, a faded blue bus appeared like a mirage. She handed the driver a wad of damp bills. He didn't ask questions. The bus smelled of vinyl, oil, and old coffee. Emily curled into a window seat, pulling Michael close. He was asleep before they left the county line, his mouth open slightly, lashes fanned across soft cheeks. Emily stared out the window, the trees melting into black shadows. For the first time in years, the air around her wasn't heavy with fear. She didn't know where they were going. Not really, but it wasn't back. By dawn, the bus rolled into Washington, D.C. The capital hummed like a machine cars honked. Vendors shouted. People in suits hurried past her like she was invisible. She clutched Michael and her bag, overwhelmed. Then she found the address scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper. Martha Klein lived on the second floor of a creaky brownstone. The hallway smelled like lemon polish and damp socks. Martha opened the door with cautious eyes and a knitted cardigan. She looked Emily over. Then the baby. "You're early," she said. "But come in." Martha's apartment was warm, worn but clean. A patchwork quilt lay across the couch, and a kettle whistled from the stove. Emily didn't speak much that first day, but Martha didn't press. She gave Emily space, a warm meal, and a promise. "No one gets to hurt you here." Emily found work at a diner 3 blocks away. It was loud, greasy, full of clatter and customers who barked orders without looking up. She learned how to carry 4 plates at once, how to smile even when her feet ached. At night, she came home smelling like bacon and burnt toast, and Michael would giggle and pretend to sniff her apron. Martha watched Michael while Emily worked. He adored her. He toddled after her, mispronouncing her name as Martha. He laughed more, slept better. Emily began to believe just maybe that he might grow up safe. At night, when the city had gone quiet, Emily sat by the window with a notebook. She wrote by lamplight, her words small and careful. Sometimes she wrote to no one. Sometimes to Michael. She poured out her fear, her guilt, her memories. She promised herself on those pages that the past would never touch him. One evening, as she cleared tables, a man came in wearing a worn suit and kind eyes. He ordered coffee and left a $10 tip. The next day, he returned, and the next, finally, he approached her. "My name is Robert Hastings," he said. "I work with a legal aid center. Someone referred you to us. I can help." Emily froze. Her hands trembled, but Robert didn't push. "When you're ready," he said, handing her a card. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, after Michael fell asleep, Emily dialed the number. Robert listened more than he spoke. He never asked for more than she could give. Slowly, Emily told him pieces of her story. He never flinched, never pitied. "You're safe now," he said. Then came the letter. It was from Eleanor Wilson, a child advocate from Dovewood. She had taken over Nathan's school case after Emily disappeared. "You're leaving," the letter said, opened the door for truth. Nathan confessed to parts of what happened. He's no longer in Dovewood. "And your silence, your courage spoke louder than you know," Emily cried, reading it. Not out of relief, but because for once, someone had seen her. She enrolled in night classes. GED prep was harder than she expected. Her mind often drifted, but she kept showing up. And one autumn evening, when she passed her final test, Martha hugged her and said, "Told you brains didn't leave with bruises." Michael grew. He started preschool. Emily watched him from the doorway, hand clutching her coat. He ran inside without fear. She smiled, proud and hollow all at once. She found a 1-bedroom apartment above a flower shop. The ceilings leaked and the stairs creaked, but it was theirs. She hung Michael's drawings on the fridge, bought curtains, lit candles that smelled like vanilla. When Michael turned 10, he asked, "Why don't I have a dad?" Emily took him to the park. They sat on a bench beneath a willow tree. "Some families are like boats," she said. "Some have anchors, some have sails. You and I, we're like a lighthouse. We stay. We shine, no matter what's out at sea." Michael leaned into her. "Then you're the lighthouse. I'm still learning." She kissed his forehead. That's all I ever hoped for. She began volunteering at a shelter for women. At first, she sorted clothes. Then she started helping with intakes. Then she led support circles. One woman said, "You talk like you've been through it." Emily replied, "I lived it, but I'm still here." Word spread. Women stayed longer, trusted deeper. Emily never gave advice she hadn't lived. She listened more than she spoke. But when she did speak, it landed like stone in water. One summer, she filed paperwork, legal name change. Emily Carter became Emily Klein. She stood outside the courthouse holding the paper, not as an erasure, but a declaration. The old name held pain. This new one chosen, earned, held peace. She went home, folded the paper neatly, and placed it in her journal. Underneath, she wrote, "Not broken, rewritten." Emily didn't stop until her legs burned and her chest ached from holding Michael close. The stars above Dovewood offered no guidance, but she knew where she was going away from the house, away from Nathan, away from the walls that had swallowed her childhood whole. She reached the old church at the edge of town by midnight. Its tall white steeple cast a long shadow across the graveyard behind it. She slipped around to the back and nestled into a sheltered spot behind a cluster of overgrown hedges. Margaret had tucked a small bottle of formula into the blanket. Emily fed Michael slowly, her hands trembling. They slept under the open sky that night. Or rather, Michael slept. Emily stared up at the dark, blinking only when her eyes burned. She didn't cry. There were no tears left, just silence, the same kind that had filled the Carter house. But this silence was different. This one wasn't forced, it was chosen. By morning, she was already moving. She reached the Greyhound stop in Haviland by late afternoon, a town 20 miles from Dovewood. Margaret had told her about it once, in whispers. "If you ever get out, you go through Haviland. No one watches there." At the station, she kept her head down. A woman in line offered her a handkerchief and asked if she was okay. Emily nodded and said nothing. The woman didn't press. When it was her turn, she bought a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C., using the crumpled bills and coins Margaret had saved for years. The bus ride took over 18 hours. The first 5 passed in a haze. Michael slept most of the time, his tiny body curled against Emily's. The driver didn't ask questions. Neither did the other passengers. She counted highway signs to stay awake. She watched lights pass like comets. She breathed in the smell of diesel and plastic seats. At one stop, a stranger offered her a sandwich. She took it. At another, an elderly woman asked to hold the baby while Emily used the restroom. Emily refused, politely but firmly. Never again would she leave Michael alone. When they arrived in Washington, it was nearly midnight. She stepped off the bus and into a world she had only ever seen on TV, in the corner of Henry's living room. Tall buildings, blinking lights, cabs honking at each other. It was overwhelming, dizzying, terrifying. But it was not Dovewood, and that was enough. She followed directions written in Margaret's handwriting on the back of a grocery receipt. They led her to a boarding house in northeast D.C., run by a woman named Martha Klein. Mrs. Klein opened the door with sleep still in her eyes. "You must be Jessica Smith," she said, reading from the letter Mrs. Wilson had mailed ahead. "Come in. We've been expecting you." Emily stepped inside. Her name wasn't Jessica, but it was now. Mrs. Klein gave her a room on the second floor. It had a single bed, a window that opened, and a clean cot for Michael. The sheets smelled of lavender and lemon. Emily sank onto the mattress and exhaled for the first time in days. She slept for almost 12 hours. In the days that followed, she learned the rules of the house. Breakfast was at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. In exchange for room and board, she would help in the kitchen and clean common areas. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. She scrubbed floors while Michael slept. She learned how to make proper coffee and fold hospital corners on sheets. She never complained. Mrs. Klein never asked questions, but she watched with kind eyes. "You work hard," she said one afternoon. "Too hard for someone your age." "I have to," Emily replied. "You don't have to do it alone." Emily nodded, but she didn't believe her. Not yet. 3 weeks after arriving, Emily applied for a part-time job at the corner diner. She used the name Jessica Smith. Age 16. She didn't have ID, but the owner, a tired man named Al, with a soft heart, hired her anyway. "You show up on time, keep the tables clean, and don't steal the pie. We'll get along just fine." She worked mornings, served coffee to cab drivers and construction crews. Most of them didn't look twice. Some flirted. She ignored them. Michael stayed with Mrs. Klein. who had once raised 5 children of her own. "He's a good baby," she said. "Knows how to be quiet." So did Emily. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Michael grew. He began to sit up, to smile more, to laugh. His laughter filled the boarding house like sunlight. Emily kept to herself. She didn't make friends. She didn't share stories. But she wrote at night pages and pages, folded and hidden beneath the floorboard under her bed. She wrote not to remember, but so she'd never forget what she survived. One evening, she returned from the diner to find Mrs. Klein sitting on the porch, holding Michael on her lap. A man in a grey coat sat beside her, holding a folder. Emily froze. The man turned. "Jessica Smith." She nodded. "My name is Robert Hastings. I'm with Child Services." Mrs. Klein stood. "I called him. Just to talk. Nothing more." Emily's knees went weak. Mr. Hastings approached slowly. "You're not in trouble. I just want to know if you need help." Emily hesitated. No one's ever helped before. Maybe it's time someone did. Emily stared at the man. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. Behind him, Mrs. Klein gently rocked Michael, whispering something low and soothing. "I don't need help," Emily said, more out of instinct than conviction. "Are you sure?" Mr. Hastings replied, "Sometimes we think we don't need it because we've never had the chance to feel what safe really is." Emily's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Michael, whose tiny hand was wrapped around the edge of Mrs. Klein's sweater. "I don't want him taken from me," she said. Mr. Hastings shook his head. "That's not why I'm here. You've done more for that boy than some women twice your age. I'm not here to separate you. I'm here to figure out how to support you." Mrs. Klein stood. "Come inside, both of you. She doesn't need a decision today, just conversation." Emily sat across from Mr. Hastings at the dining table. He asked simple questions. Where had she come from? Did she feel safe now? What were her plans? Each question felt like lifting a stone she'd buried years ago. She didn't give details. Not names, not the town, just shadows. He listened, wrote a few notes, then handed her a card. "If anything changes, if you ever need someone who'll believe you, call this number. No pressure." She nodded, tucked the card away. It sat under the floorboard next to her writing for months. Fall arrived. Leaves turned gold and red and drifted like feathers across the sidewalk. Michael turned one. The house held a small party. Mrs. Klein made carrot cake, and one of the older guests gifted Emily a handmade sweater for the baby. It was navy blue, slightly too big, with buttons shaped like stars. That night, Emily wrote something different in her notebook. "Today, we were just a family, not a secret, not a shame, just people." She folded the page slowly, placed it with the others, and exhaled. She saved money, not much, but enough. Al at the diner gave her a small raise. "You're good for business," he said. "The regulars like you." One of the waitresses, Joy, started walking home with her after shifts. She was older, kind, didn't pry. Sometimes they shared sandwiches on the curb outside the diner. "You got secrets," Joy said once, "but you don't wear them like chains. You wear them like armor." Emily smiled. "They used to be chains." Joy nodded. "Then you've already won." One Friday in December, as snow dusted the pavement and Michael napped, Emily received a letter. It came from a woman named Eleanor Wilson, the same Mrs. Wilson from Dovewood. She held the envelope like it might burn her fingers. Inside was a short note, no return address. "I heard you made it. I hope you're safe. I hope you're free." He's still there, but people are beginning to talk. Your silence spoke louder than his noise ever did. Emily read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it beneath her pillow. She didn't cry, but something inside her loosened. Spring came. Michael took his first steps in the garden behind the boarding house. The women clapped. Emily knelt in the grass, arms open, catching him as he stumbled forward. "You did it," she whispered. "So did you," a voice in her head replied. 6 months after her first meeting with Mr. Hastings, Emily received a letter inviting her to attend a GED prep course offered at the local community centre. She hesitated. "I dropped out before high school started," she told Mrs. Klein. Mrs. Klein stirred her tea. "That doesn't mean you don't deserve to finish." And so, every Tuesday and Thursday night, Emily sat in a small room with 10 other adults and learned algebra and history and how to write a 5-paragraph essay. She was good at it. She liked it. Michael started daycare at the church next door. The first day, she stayed outside the door, heart pounding. But when she peeked in and saw him playing with blocks and laughing, something in her steadied. This was a new world, and they were learning to live in it. 2 years passed. Emily passed her GD. Michael turned 3. They moved into a small apartment just 2 blocks from the boarding house. It had peeling paint, thin walls, and a crooked window frame, but it was theirs. Joy brought over a welcome mat. Al sent a pie. Mrs. Klein visited every Sunday. Emily worked mornings at the diner and evenings at the library, shelving books, helping kids find stories. Sometimes she paused to read with Michael on the floor beneath the children's section. One day, a little girl asked her if she was Michael's big sister. No, Emily said, smiling. I'm his mum. You're really good at it, the girl said. Emily didn't reply, but the smile lingered. She still wrote at night, only now the words had changed. Less about pain, more about possibilities. Letters to her future self, to Michael, to the girl she used to be. She kept them all. Someday, maybe she would show him. But not yet. Not until he was ready. Not until she was. But life had its way of testing even the quietest strength. One morning, as Emily was leaving the library with Michael, now tall enough to hold her hand firmly, she saw something that stopped her mid-step. A man lean, broad-shouldered, green-eyed crossed the opposite side of the street. For a second, her lungs forgot how to breathe. It wasn't Nathan, but it could have been. She pulled Michael closer, walked faster, heart pounding until she reached the apartment. That night, she didn't sleep. The walls closed in like the ones back in Dovewood. The next day, she asked Mrs. Klein if she could borrow the old typewriter in the attic. She sat at the table and began typing 1 page at a time, a document that would begin the legal process of changing her name permanently. No more Jessica Smith. She was ready to become Emily Randall again, but this time on her terms. With Mr. Hastings' help, she filed the papers. The court date was set for July. She dressed carefully that morning. Michael wore a clean white shirt and blue suspenders. He held her hand as they entered the courthouse. The judge, a kind woman in her 60s, reviewed the file, looked over her glasses, and said, "You've been brave, Ms. Smith." Emily stood. "Thank you, but I don't want to be Missy Smith anymore." "What do you want to be?" the judge asked. "Emily Klein," she replied. She turned and met Mrs. Klein's teary eyes in the gallery. The woman nodded, lips pressed tight. The gavel came down, so ordered. It was done. A name reborn, not inherited, chosen. That fall, Emily was offered a position as assistant coordinator at the local women's shelter. Mr. Hastings had recommended her. "We need someone like you," the director said. "Someone who understands what it means to survive." She accepted. She worked evenings, helped women file restraining orders, find jobs, learn to breathe again. Some were younger than she had been, others twice her age. All carried invisible weight. One night, she found a teenage girl crying in the hallway. The girl reminded her of herself thin, silent, bracing for a blow that never came. Emily sat beside her. "You're not alone," she said. The girl didn't reply, but she didn't pull away either. Michael started school the following year. He ran home one day holding a drawing of a house, a sun, and 3 stick figures. "This is me," he said, pointing to the smallest one. "And this is you. And this is Grandma Klein. Where's your dad?" Another boy had asked him at school. Michael had shrugged. "I don't know, but my mum's enough." Emily framed the picture. It hung in the kitchen for years. One Sunday, Joy came by for coffee. They sat on the porch while Michael rode his bike up and down the street. "You ever think about going back?" Joy asked gently. Emily shook her head. "There's nothing left there." "But don't you want to know?" Emily looked at the trees, swaying in the late afternoon sun. "I already know, and I have everything I need right here." Joy squeezed her hand. "That's peace. Honey, you found it." Emily smiled. She had. By the time Michael turned 10, he was reading novels and asking questions about the world. One night, he came into her room with a book in his hand. "Mom, yes, baby, where did I come from?" Emily closed the book she was reading. She took a breath. "You came from a place full of storms, but you were the light that helped me get through it." He tilted his head. "So, like a lighthouse," she chuckled. "Exactly like that." He smiled. "Cool." He left, satisfied. She cried, just a little. Then she went to her desk and wrote one more letter to the girl she used to be. "You made it, not just out, but forward. You gave him a future. And in doing so, you gave yourself one too." She folded the letter, placed it with the others, and turned off the light. And in the darkness, there was no fear, only silence. But this time, It was the good kind. In the following months, Emily's quiet strength began to ripple outward. Word of her steady presence at the shelter spread. She wasn't loud, but she listened. She wasn't flashy, but she followed through. People started to notice the girl with the calm voice and fire in her eyes. She was soon invited to speak just briefly at a small fundraiser hosted by the shelter. She stood behind the podium in a modest dress, heart racing. Michael, seated between Joy and Mrs. Klein, gave her a double thumbs up. "I'm not here to tell you everything I've been through," she began, "but I am here to tell you what it feels like when someone finally sees you, not as a burden, but as a person. That's what saved me. That's what we give here." When she stepped down, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was warm, genuine. For the first time, she felt like her voice didn't disappear into the walls. A month later, a new resident arrived at the shelter, a woman named Tanya with a split lip, 3 kids, and a silence so deep it hurt to hear. Emily took the intake forms, offered tea, and helped her settle in. She didn't ask about the bruises. Tanya didn't offer an explanation, but the next morning, she found a note on her pillow. "Thank you for not asking. It means everything." Emily folded it and added it to the growing box under her bed. Sometimes, healing didn't look like dramatic courtroom victories. Sometimes, it looked like making dinner with donated vegetables. It looked like helping a woman learn how to refill a prescription, or holding someone's hand when their ex showed up at a custody hearing. Emily didn't try to be anyone's hero. She just showed up. And for the first time in her life, she began to believe she was good at something not in spite of her past, but because of it. Michael brought home a permission slip for a field trip to the Capitol building. "It's for civics," he said. "They want us to learn how laws are made." Emily paused. Laws. There had been no laws for her when she needed them. No courtroom, no lawyer, no justice. But maybe that could change. She called Mr. Hastings. "I want to do more," she said. "Not just at the shelter. I want to speak about what happens when no one listens." He didn't hesitate. "I'll connect you." She began volunteering with a local advocacy group that lobbied for reforms in family court protections. They needed stories, lived experience, clarity from survivors, not just statistics. She wrote a speech. She rehearsed it dozens of times. And in the spring, she stood before a city council subcommittee and told them what it looked like to be 15 pregnant from abuse, trapped by silence. "My son saved me," she said, "but I shouldn't have needed saving in the first place. We can do better." Reporters asked for quotes. One ran her story anonymously in a local feature. A week later, a letter arrived at the shelter. No return address. Just a line. "We were wrong to believe him. I'm so sorry. It was the second time Mrs. Wilson had reached out. Emily burned the letter, not in anger, but in release. She didn't need anything from Dovewood anymore. One summer afternoon, Emily and Bugger Michael visited a nearby lake with Joy and her niece. They sat on the dock, feet in the water, sharing sandwiches. Michael pointed across the lake. "That house over there looks like a castle." "Maybe it is," Joy said, nudging him. "You ever want to live in a castle?" "Mum," Michael asked. Emily smiled. "No, I like small houses. Easier to fill with love." Joy raised her can of lemonade. "To small houses and strong women." Emily clinked hers against it. "To second chances," she said. Michael looked puzzled. "What were the first chances?" Emily ruffled his hair. "Things I never want you to go through." As the years rolled forward, Emily never stopped showing up. Not for herself, not for her son, not for the dozens of women who arrived at the shelter with nothing but silence in their pockets. And when people asked her how she did it, she always gave the same answer. One step at a time, one whisper after another, because some silences aren't empty. Some are just waiting for someone to listen. In late autumn, Emily took a weekend class on trauma-informed care, funded by the shelter's continuing education program. She sat beside social workers and nurses, soaking in every word about how to hold space for someone whose life had been upended. She learned how to ask without pushing, how to support without rescuing, how to help someone feel safe again without taking their agency. That evening, she stood in the empty shelter kitchen washing mugs and looking out at the parking lot lights. Joy entered quietly. "You looked like you belonged there today," Joy said, drying her hands. "I felt like I did," Emily answered, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. One of the women in the shelter, a 22-year-old named Bianca, approached Emily one night in tears. Her boyfriend had tracked her phone. She didn't know what to do. Emily didn't panic. She sat Bianca down, got her breathing, helped her call the helpline, and walked her through the steps of a tech safety plan. Then she stayed up until 3 a.m. just in case he showed up. He didn't. And in the morning, Bianca whispered, "I don't know how you're so calm." Emily smiled gently, "Because I remember what it was like when someone didn't show up for me. And I promised myself I'd never let that happen to anyone else." Bianca hugged her. It was the first time anyone at the shelter had done that. Later that winter, Emily applied for a state certification in peer advocacy. The exam was grueling. Essays, ethics scenarios, a live interview panel. She passed. The certificate arrived in the mail a week before her 25th birthday. Michael decorated the apartment with hand-drawn signs. "You did it, Mom!" And officially amazing. They ordered pizza and danced in socks across the kitchen floor. Emily began facilitating a weekly support group at the shelter. Every Tuesday night, 6 to 8 women gathered in a circle. Some spoke, some cried, some stayed silent for weeks before uttering a word, but they came, and Emily was always there. At the end of each session, she read a closing line she had written herself. "We are not broken, we are building, one brick at a time." The women began repeating it with her. Week after week, the local paper ran a feature on the shelter's new outreach efforts. Emily was photographed on the front porch, holding a clipboard, Michael in the background helping unpack food boxes. A few days later, a letter arrived addressed to Misty, Emily Klein. This time, it was from someone she didn't expect. "Dear Emily, I don't expect forgiveness, but I saw your photo. I see the life you've made. And I see now what I failed to do. If there's ever a way to make peace, I would like to try. Margaret, Nan." Emily read the letter in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't respond. But she placed the letter inside the box beneath her bed. Some wounds didn't close, but some didn't need to. By spring, Emily was invited to join the advisory board of the shelter. She declined the title, but agreed to consult and mentor new volunteers. Her presence had become more than comfort. It had become cornerstone. She and Michael planted tomatoes in the tiny garden beside their apartment. They named the plants after authors Harper, Maya, Tony. Michael liked watering them before school. "You know," he said one morning, "most kids don't have gardens." "We're not most kids," Emily said. "We're better," he said. She smiled. "Yes, we are." That summer, the shelter hosted its first Community Voices Day, an open house inviting neighbors, donors, and former residents to share stories and connect with one another. Emily, now comfortable with public speaking, helped organize the entire event. The garden behind the shelter was strung with paper lanterns. Tables held framed quotes from survivors, alongside photos of milestones reached. Jobs landed, restraining orders secured, degrees earned. A donation box filled quickly. People stayed longer than expected, lingering in the sun. Emily gave the closing remarks. "We often think strength looks like power, but sometimes it's the quiet choice to stay kind when the world isn't, to show up for yourself when nobody else does. That kind of strength lives in every woman here." The applause was real. Later that night, Michael asked, "Mum, do people clap because they feel sad or because they feel proud?" She thought for a moment. "Both," she said. "But when people are proud, it means something changed, even if just a little." In the fall, the shelter lost a key grant, putting several programs at risk. Emily, along with the director, began writing appeal letters. She also created a peer support petition, gathering testimonials from current and former residents about how the shelter had saved their lives. One woman, Rosa, wrote, "Before I met Emily, I thought I was broken, but she looked me in the eye like I wasn't something to fix, just someone to walk with. She never asked me to be brave, but I became brave because she believed I could be." They submitted the letter packet to 3 foundations. One responded with a check for $40,000. Emily cried in the break room, quietly, gratefully. That winter, Emily took Michael to his first school play. He had a small role, a talking sunflower. He stood at center stage, face painted yellow, and beamed when he spotted her in the audience. After the show, as they walked home, hand in hand, he asked, "Did I do okay? You were the best sunflower I've ever seen." He grinned. "Next year I want to be a tree." "Whatever you grow into," she said, "you'll be amazing." He didn't understand the full weight of her words, but one day he would. On the 5th anniversary of her arrival in D.C., Emily returned to the Greyhound station. She stood on the sidewalk outside, Michael beside her, now tall enough to reach her shoulder. "I don't remember this," he said. "You were a baby," she replied. "Why are we here? To remind ourselves how far we've come." They went inside. She bought 2 small sodas and a bag of pretzels, just like the ones she'd eaten the day they escaped. They sat on the same bench. The air still smelled like diesel and cold vinyl, but this time, it wasn't frightening. It was a full circle. On their way out, a young woman stood outside the terminal, holding a baby and looking lost. Her coat was too thin. Her eyes darted. Emily walked over slowly. "Hi, you okay?" The girl flinched, then nodded, just waiting. Emily looked into her face. "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know there's a place you can go. Warm, safe." She handed her a card from the shelter. "We'll help you if you want." The girl nodded again. Her lips trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. As Emily and Michael walked away, he said, "You were her once." Emily looked ahead. "I know," she said. "That's why I stopped." Part 3. The Escape and the Promise. Emily's days moved in quiet rhythm work, school runs, evening support groups, and community meetings. But underneath that calm surface, something was shifting. The peace she'd built over the past 6 years had grown roots, yet there remained a flicker of unrest deep inside her. Not fear she had long since made peace with survival, but something more restless. A whisper, a calling. It began with a letter. A law student from Georgetown, researching survivors who became advocates, wrote to her after reading about the shelter. The letter was earnest, respectful, and ended with a request. Would Emily be willing to speak at a symposium about trauma-informed legislation? Emily hesitated. She had spoken in small rooms before, but this would be different. This would be recorded, shared. "I don't know if I'm ready," she told Joy. Joy smiled over her tea. "You've already done it. Every time you show up, every time you help someone breathe. This is just putting it in front of a microphone." Michael chimed in from the kitchen. "I think you should do it, Mum." Emily nodded slowly. "Then I'll do it." The symposium was held in an old auditorium, worn but dignified. Emily sat backstage in a soft navy dress, her notes clutched loosely in one hand. She'd rehearsed the speech dozens of times alone, in front of Michael, even whispered in the shelter's garden. When her name was called, she stepped into the light. The crowd quieted. "I never thought I'd be the one holding the mic," she began. "I thought I was the story people whispered about, the one they pitied or ignored. But I'm here to say that survival is not where our stories end. It's where we begin." She spoke for 15 minutes. About silence, about rebuilding, about how the law could do more to recognize the invisible wounds survivors carry. When she stepped off stage, several people reached out not to congratulate, but to connect. One woman, a judge from New York, said, "Your words reminded me why I do this work." Emily returned home lighter, not because it was easy, but because it had meant something. Around the same time, Emily learned of a pilot program in the state legislature, a survivor-led task force to help reform policies around child protection and domestic violence. Her name had been recommended. She applied. The interview process was long and rigorous, with questions not just about her experience, but her ideas, her resilience, her readiness to collaborate with lawmakers and lawyers. In February, she received a letter, "Welcome to the task force." Joy brought over sparkling cider. Michael made a banner from construction paper. "You're going to help change the law?" he asked. "I'm going to try," she said. The first meeting took place in the Capitol's West Wing. Emily sat beside educators, policymakers, and 2 other survivors. It was intimidating, but also empowering. For once, her past wasn't a secret to hide, but a compass. She listened more than she spoke, especially at first. But when she did speak, the room paused, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't have to. One senator later told her, "You speak like someone who's already carried the weight." People hear that. Emily began drafting a proposal for a survivor-centered protection clause, one that would allow emergency relocation support for minors fleeing household abuse. She called it the Safe Start Act. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard as she wrote the first draft, but she kept going. Meanwhile, at home, Michael was growing fast. His questions had more depth now. He was curious about his last name, about why there were no baby photos from his first year, about why Emily kept a locked box beneath her bed. One evening, Emily unlocked it. She showed him the old letters, the folded drawings, the bus ticket stub. She told him pieces of the story, not all of it, but enough to explain why their life was built from scratch. He didn't cry, but he hugged her fiercely. "You kept me safe," he said. "No," she replied. "We kept each other safe." A week after their conversation, Emily and Michael visited the small family-owned bookstore on Main Street. Michael had been saving his allowance for a collection of science fiction novels. While he browsed the shelves, Emily wandered toward the local interest section, where a softcover volume titled Women Who Rebuilt caught her eye. She flipped through its pages. Each chapter highlighted a survivor's story. Some were small victories, rebuilding credit, renting a first apartment. Others were extraordinary, opening non-profits, testifying in court, running for local office. The final chapter was blank, titled Only Yours. Emily smiled, bought the book, and gave it to the shelter's resource room the next day. In case someone needs to see themselves, she told Joy. The Safe Start Act gained traction slowly. A state senator took interest and invited Emily to co-present the proposal in a legislative work group. She prepared meticulously, spending late nights researching policy language and statistics on minors in unsafe homes. Michael, ever supportive, made her flashcards with bold headings like funding structure and judicial review. The day of the workgroup meeting, Emily stood in a tailored grey blazer borrowed from Joy and delivered her proposal with quiet conviction. Lawmakers listened. Some asked hard questions. One tried to deflect. She didn't flinch. "This isn't about fixing broken homes," she said. "It's about giving children the right to start over when the adults around them fail to protect them." The room was quiet, and then came a nod. Another. The act moved forward to committee review. At the shelter, change was brewing too. A new director had arrived, young, energetic, but unfamiliar with the shelter's deeper history. One day, he proposed replacing the peer-led support group with a licensed therapist. Emily resisted. Therapy has its place, but so does lived experience. These women need someone who's walked through fire, not just studied it. The director disagreed. A tense staff meeting followed. Emily sat quiet through most of it, then stood at the end. "I'm not here for credit or titles," she said. "I'm here because, once upon a time, someone looked me in the eye and said, 'You're not invisible.' I intend to keep passing that on." The room voted. The peer program stayed, and the director later asked her to join a new advisory board, unofficial but influential. Michael turned 12. He wrote a school essay titled "My Hero is My Mum." His teacher mailed a copy to Emily with a sticky note. He reads beyond his years, and he writes from the heart. She read it alone in her bedroom. He had described her in simple phrases. "She listens even when I don't talk. She remembers everything. She believes in second chances." Emily tucked the essay into her locked box. She no longer kept that box as a place for hiding. Now, it was a vault of proof. Proof that she had rebuilt not only a life, but a legacy. Spring returned, and with it, the annual Capital Day for advocates and lawmakers. Emily was invited to deliver a brief keynote before the committee vote on the Safe Start Act. She stood once more before a crowded hall, this time steadier, anchored not in fear, but in clarity. She shared stories not of herself, but of women she'd walked alongside, children who needed a way out, moments where silence nearly cost lives. "I'm not here to inspire pity," she said. "I'm here to prove what happens when someone is given a real chance. I am the result of what can grow in safety. My son is the result of what healing looks like when it's protected." When she finished, a standing ovation followed, not dramatic, but deliberate, the kind that rises slowly, builds with weight, and lingers. 3 weeks later, the bill passed its first committee vote. Emily received the news while stirring soup at the shelter. Joy ran in, phone in hand, nearly shouting. They said yes, it's going forward. Emily smiled, wiped her hands, and held the phone to her chest. "Yes," she whispered. That summer, she and Michael took a short trip to the coast. It was their first vacation, 2 nights in a modest motel, long walks on the beach, grilled cheese from a roadside shack. Michael collected shells. Emily collected quiet. On the second night, sitting on the sand beneath a lavender sky, Michael asked, "Would you ever go back to Dovewood?" Emily shook her head slowly. "No. There's nothing there for me anymore. But what if someone needed to hear your side? Emily considered that. Then maybe one day, they'll find it in the laws we're writing, in the lives we're saving. Michael rested his head on her shoulder. You're like the law now, he said sleepily. But nice, she laughed quietly. In August, Emily received an invitation to a National Survivor Leadership Summit in Chicago. Travel expenses paid, keynote slot reserved. She hesitated only for a second before saying yes. The conference was bigger than anything she'd done, hundreds of attendees, press coverage, a stage with spotlights. The night before her speech, she couldn't sleep. She walked the city streets, replaying her journey in her head like a film reel. The next morning, she stood before the crowd, looked out over the sea of faces, many who carried scars like hers, and spoke from the center of her chest. This isn't just a story about pain, she said. It's a story about what happens after, about what we build, about the people we become when the world thinks we're finished. We are not finished. We're just getting started. They rose to their feet, and that time, Emily allowed herself to cry, not from grief, from arrival. Later that year, the Safe Start Act was scheduled for a full Senate vote. Emily, along with 2 other members of the task force, traveled once more to the Capitol. They'd been granted a private briefing room before the hearing. While waiting, Emily opened her notebook, reviewing the bullet points she'd written in tidy ink. Funding protections for emergency shelter, automatic hearings for underage relocation requests, and lastly, empowerment through choice. She traced the last phrase with her finger. It wasn't just about the policy. It was about giving children like her the words they never knew they were allowed to say. That afternoon, the bill passed with a narrow but decisive majority. When the vote was called, Emily was watching from the gallery. Her breath caught, her eyes stung. Then it was done. The Safe Start Act was real. She exited the building into golden fall light, dialed Michael from the Capitol steps, and simply said, "We did it." A week later, she received an email from a regional news outlet. They wanted to feature her story, not just the legislation, but her personal journey. Emily hesitated. Visibility had always been a tool she used cautiously. But this time, she didn't feel exposed. She felt grounded. She agreed, on one condition: tell it from the point of view of change, not tragedy. The article ran with the headline, "From Silence to Strength, the quiet force behind a new future for survivors." The photo showed her standing outside the shelter, arms crossed, a soft smile on her lips. That winter, Emily was invited to speak at a high school assembly as part of a civic leadership initiative. She stood in front of 300 teenagers, many slouched in their chairs, some attentive, some guarded. She told them not about her trauma, but about the strength it took to rebuild, to ask for help, to keep going. "You don't have to be loud to matter," she said. "You just have to keep showing up, even when no one sees you, especially then." Afterward, a girl approached her in the hallway and said, "Thank you. I didn't know anyone else felt like me." Emily gently squeezed her hand. "Now you do." Michael's 13th birthday came with pizza, homemade decorations, and a new set of watercolor paints. He'd taken up drawing lately portraits of their neighborhood, images from his dreams. A picture of Emily seated beneath a tree with her eyes closed. "She looks peaceful," Joy said, studying the painting. "She is," Michael said. "I think she's finally safe there." Emily blinked hard but said nothing. The truth was, she did feel safe now, not because nothing could hurt her, but because she finally knew she could survive it. Near the end of the school year, Emily received a call from a women's leadership foundation. She'd been nominated for their Quiet Champion Award, given to individuals who had made a lasting impact without seeking attention. She nearly declined. But Michael said, "You always tell me to be proud of the good things. You should be proud too." So she accepted. At the ceremony, she wore a simple navy dress and said only a few words. "I didn't rebuild alone. Every step I took was on ground someone else held steady for me. I'm just doing the same for someone else now." The applause was soft but full, just like her story, just like her promise. 2 months after receiving the Quiet Champion Award, Emily was approached by a national non-profit, the Center for Survivor Policy and Advocacy. They had followed her progress since the passage of the Safe Start Act and asked if she would join as a consultant to help develop trauma-informed training for lawmakers across the country. At first, Emily hesitated. Her work at the shelter still filled most of her time. But the mission resonated too deeply to ignore. She agreed to one project, a pilot program in her own state. The first workshop took place inside the state capitol. Emily stood in front of a room filled with public defenders, judges, and child welfare officers. She opened with a simple truth. You may not see the bruises, but if you listen long enough, the story will tell you where it hurts. Her words hung in the air, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Back at the shelter, she began mentoring a new volunteer named Claire, a 20-something intern studying criminal justice. Claire asked hundreds of questions and often shadowed Emily quietly through intake sessions and group meetings. One evening, Claire pulled her aside. You make it look easy, but it's not, is it? Emily smiled softly. No, but it's worth it. Every single time someone walks in afraid and leaves knowing they're not alone. That's enough. Claire nodded. I want to do what you do one day. You already are, Emily said, just by being here. That fall, Emily received a letter from a university offering her an honorary degree in public service. It felt surreal, like a world she was never supposed to step into was now holding its door open. She accepted. Michael watched her cross the stage in a black gown and mortarboard, clapping louder than anyone. When they got home, he framed the degree and hung it next to his own art. It makes the room smarter, he joked. No, Emily replied. It makes the room remember. In one of her final public addresses that year, Emily stood on a small stage in a local library. The audience was modest. Foster parents, social workers, 2 middle school teachers, and a few curious neighbors. She ended with this. You don't have to save the world. Just help someone feel seen in it. That's how we begin to change everything. After the talk, an elderly man approached her. I'm a retired judge, he said. I think I got some things wrong, but you made me want to start getting them right. Emily held his gaze and said, then today's a good day to start. In December, Emily was invited to a private luncheon hosted by a bipartisan coalition focused on reforming family court systems. She wasn't a politician or a lawyer, but she was the only person on the guest list who had lived through the system and helped change it. She spoke softly, but with precision. She shared how survivors often lost custody, not because they were unfit, but because they were afraid, and how the legal system rarely understood the difference. A prominent senator turned to her afterward and said, we need more voices like yours in the room, not after the vote before it. Emily nodded. I'm always willing to sit at the table, as long as it's not just for show. The shelter where she worked began a campaign to expand their services. More beds, trauma therapy for teens, legal counseling. Emily helped write the proposal. She spent nights assembling data, crafting personal narratives, even recording testimonials from former residents. One recording featured Bianca, now in community college, telling the story of the night Emily stayed up with her. She didn't treat me like I was weak. She treated me like I was worth standing beside. The funding came through, and with it, Emily was offered the position of program director. She declined. I'm better with people than with paperwork, she said, but I'll keep doing the work that matters. Instead, she recommended Claire for the role and mentored her through the transition. Michael's 14th birthday arrived with a new bike, homemade strawberry cake, and a small hardcover journal. Inside the front cover, Emily wrote, for the stories you'll tell, for the people you'll help, for the world you'll help shape. Michael flipped to a blank page and began writing that same night. Later, he showed her a paragraph titled, What Courage Feels Like. She didn't change a word. She just hugged him longer than usual. One evening, they visited a mural recently unveiled near the Capitol. It featured survivors from all walks of life. In the lower corner, in soft blue paint, was a quote attributed to Emily. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. It means we've chosen our moment. And now this is it. Michael stood beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. That's yours, he said. No, Emily replied. It's ours. And for once, she allowed herself to believe it. The next chapter of Emily's journey began with something ordinary, a request from a nearby middle school to lead a workshop on safe boundaries and emotional resilience. She wasn't sure what to expect, but when she arrived, she saw a cafeteria filled with 12 and 13-year-olds sitting cross-legged on the floor, waiting for her. She started with a story not her own, but one she had heard many times from women at the shelter. A story of fear, but also of choosing to survive. They say bravery is loud, she told them, but sometimes it's the quietest choices that save our lives. After the session, a guidance counselor approached her. That was the first time I've seen some of those kids really listen. Word spread. Soon, Emily was asked to replicate the workshop at other schools, then at libraries, youth programs, and juvenile centers. She developed a curriculum called Steady Steps. It combined storytelling, emotional literacy, and peer mentorship. It wasn't just about protection, it was about building internal strength before the world tried to take it away. The Center for Survivor Policy and Advocacy invited her to co-author a paper on early intervention strategies in low-income school districts. Emily dove deep into the research, pairing data with lived experience, statistics with stories. She worked late into the night, Michael occasionally peeking in to offer snacks or simply sit nearby. At the paper's publication ceremony, her name was printed in bold. Dr. Lena Roth, a longtime trauma psychologist, said, "This is the most comprehensive intersection of theory and practice I've ever read, and it's thanks to someone who lived it." Emily blushed quietly, then smiled. In her neighborhood, people had begun to refer to the small apartment she and Michael lived in as the Blue Door Place. Kids would wave as they passed. Neighbors would drop off extra fruit or gently used clothes. One evening, a single mother knocked on her door holding her daughter's hand. "Someone at church said you might know what to do," she said. "We're not safe anymore." Emily didn't hesitate. She welcomed them inside. That winter, Michael submitted a short essay to a national competition themed Hope Is. His entry, inspired by Emily, won first place. The prize included a reading at the local performing arts centre. Michael stood under the stage lights, voice steady, hands not trembling. "Hope," he said, "is my mother, making soup on the same stove where she once boiled silence. It's knowing she didn't escape to hide. She escaped to lead." Emily sat in the second row, hand over her heart. She didn't cry, but joy, sitting beside her, did. The following spring, the City Council launched a new initiative, a community-led safety board. Emily was nominated without her knowledge. When she received the email, she assumed it was a mistake, but it wasn't. She accepted the role not because she felt ready, but because she knew her perspective was needed. The board met monthly at the public library. There were police officers, social workers, neighborhood leaders, and now Emily. In one of the early sessions, a heated argument broke out about funding priorities. Some argued for more patrol cars, others for better lighting in alleys. Emily waited, and then she said, calmly, "No one looks to a siren to feel safe. They look to a neighbor who leaves the porch light on. Let's build more porch lights." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. And gradually, the energy shifted. That summer, a national public radio program invited Emily for an interview. It wasn't live. She could request edits. Still, her voice trembled slightly as the host began. They spoke for nearly an hour about policy, about healing, about Michael, and about the parts of her story she had once thought she'd never say aloud. When the episode aired, letters began arriving. Dozens, then hundreds, from mothers, from daughters, from social workers, from people who had been silent until they heard someone speak who reminded them of themselves. One letter ended, "I don't know how to start, but I do now, because you showed me it's possible." Emily read that one 3 times, then folded it into her journal. Claire, now program director at the shelter, asked Emily to co-host their 10-year anniversary event. The theme was Roots and Branches. Emily gave a short speech. "We plant hope in quiet soil. We water it with patience. And one day, someone else finds shade under its leaves." The room stood in applause. Among the crowd were women she had once helped check in during their darkest nights. Now they were volunteers, students, mothers, leaders. Emily looked out at them. She didn't see brokenness. She saw a forest. Weeks later, Emily received a surprising invitation from the State University, where she once thought she'd never set foot. They were launching a new center for restorative justice and wanted Emily to serve on the founding advisory panel. At first, she hesitated, not because of fear, but because it felt surreal to be seen not as someone needing help, but as someone shaping the future. At the first panel meeting, seated between professors and legal scholars, Emily listened carefully. When her turn came, she offered this: "You can't build justice in a vacuum. It has to come from the people who've lived through what the system failed to see." The panel coordinator nodded slowly. "That's why we asked you to be here. That same month, she and Michael attended a community play his friend was cast in a lead role. During the intermission, a woman approached Emily, middle-aged, well-dressed, with cautious eyes. "Are you the Emily Carter?" she asked softly. Emily blinked. "I'm Emily." "Yes?" The woman exhaled. "You helped my niece years ago. She never forgot it. Said you gave her the words when she couldn't find them herself." Emily didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and smiled. Some gifts returned in whispers. Back at the shelter, renovations were underway thanks to a new round of funding. A wing was being built specifically for teens and young mothers. Joy proposed naming the new wing after Emily, but Emily shook her head. "Name it after every girl who walked through those doors and stayed anyway," she said. "That's the name that matters." They settled on the resilience wing, and on the first day it opened. Michael cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked questions. Emily stayed in the background, arms folded, heart full. That winter, a former state representative who had once voted against the Safe Start Act called Emily to request a meeting. She agreed. They sat in a quiet coffee shop. He looked older now, more tired. "I didn't get it then," he said, "but I've been listening. I'd like to help now. However I can." Emily stirred her tea. "Then let's start where you stopped." Weeks later, Emily received a surprising invitation from the state university where she once thought she'd never set foot. They were launching a new center for restorative justice and wanted Emily to serve on the founding advisory panel. At first, she hesitated, not because of fear, but because it felt surreal to be seen not as someone needing help, but as someone shaping the future. At the first panel meeting, seated between professors and legal scholars, Emily listened carefully. When her turn came, she offered this. "You can't build justice in a vacuum. It has to come from the people who've lived through what the system failed to see." The panel coordinator nodded slowly. "That's why we asked you to be here." That same month, she and Michael attended a community play his friend was cast in a lead role. During the intermission, a woman approached Emily, middle-aged, well-dressed, with cautious eyes. "Are you the Emily Carter?" she asked softly. Emily blinked. "I'm Emily." "Yes." The woman exhaled. "You helped my niece years ago. She never forgot it. Said you gave her the words when she couldn't find them herself." Emily didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and smiled. Some gifts returned in whispers. Back at the shelter, renovations were underway thanks to a new round of funding. A wing was being built specifically for teens and young mothers. Joy proposed naming the new wing after Emily, but Emily shook her head. "Name it after every girl who walked through those doors and stayed anyway," she said. "That's the name that matters." They settled on the resilience wing, and on the first day it opened, Michael cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked questions. Emily stayed in the background, arms folded, heart full. That winter, a former state representative who had once voted against the Safe Start Act called Emily to request a meeting. She agreed. They sat in a quiet coffee shop. He looked older now, more tired. "I didn't get it then," he said, "but I've been listening. I'd like to help now, however I can." Emily stirred her tea. "Then let's start where you stopped." The shelter's annual report that year featured Emily on the final page. Not a posed photo, just a candid shot of her laughing with two children in the community garden. Below the image, a simple quote, "She helped us remember how to grow." It was the line most shared when the report was posted online. One of the comments read, "I was one of those kids. I still am. Thank you, Emily." During a quiet evening at home, Michael asked, "Do you think Dad would have understood any of this?" Emily paused, maybe not with words, but maybe he would have seen the light in your eyes and known he didn't break us. Michael nodded. "We didn't stay broken. That's the part I like best." Emily reached out and tucked a curl behind his ear. "That's the part I fought hardest for." Part 4. The afterglow. The morning sun crept gently through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the floor of the modest apartment Emily now called home. She was 61, and though her hair had thinned and silvered, her eyes still held that same quiet intensity. Life had softened around the edges, not in surrender, but in acceptance. Michael had left for college 2 years prior, earning a full scholarship to a university in Oregon, where he studied social work and creative writing. He called every Sunday without fail, not out of obligation but love. Their conversations wandered from mundane updates to deeper musings about purpose, pain, and the slow craft of becoming. There were moments when Emily felt the gap between them when he spoke about policies or movements she didn't fully understand, or when he missed a call due to finals. Once, she gently asked if he was still happy. He replied, "I'm learning to be the way you taught me by paying attention to the quiet parts." One afternoon, he shared something he'd written for a campus journal. "My mother never raised her voice to be heard. She didn't need to. She taught me that silence can be a kind of leadership, and that some of the loudest revolutions begin in kitchens and back rooms, far from cameras." Emily printed it out and tucked it into her favorite book. Back in the city, the shelter had evolved into a multi-service hub. They now offered trauma-informed childcare, job readiness programs, housing referrals, and free legal clinics. Emily no longer worked full-time, but remained a trusted advisor and mentor to the next generation of staff. Young volunteers often sought her guidance. One, a shy girl named Haley, once asked, "How do you know when you've done enough?" Instead of answering right away, Emily invited her to help set up for the weekly dinner. Together, they folded napkins, stirred soup, and lit candles. Later that evening, as a woman from the shelter held her sleeping child with quiet dignity, Emily nodded toward her and said, "You don't. But if someone who was drowning is now swimming, maybe that's your answer." The shelter hosted monthly storytelling nights. Emily rarely read her own stories, but she always attended. One night, a former resident named Amina told the group, "When I arrived, I had nothing but fear. Miss Emily never asked me to explain it. She just handed me tea and a clean blanket, and that was enough for me to believe I could stay." After the event, Emily quietly placed a new journal in the donation basket with a note, "For your first page. Write it down, even if no one sees it yet." She also started a weekly walking club, informal but beloved. Residents, staff, neighbors, and the occasional teenager joined her on early Saturday mornings. The route changed, but the purpose stayed the same: movement, conversation, connection. She had a habit of picking up litter along the way, and others followed suit without being asked. One morning, a boy around 10 years old asked why she always carried an extra bag. Emily smiled and said, "Because sometimes the world drops things it shouldn't, and someone has to pick them up." Emily had taken to long walks around the neighborhood. At the library steps, she would often sit and read aloud to a group of children whose parents were in recovery programs. Once, she helped a young mother carry groceries home, listening without judgment as the woman shared her fears about losing custody. People knew her. They waved. Some would join her on the bench outside the bakery where she liked to sit with her tea. Strangers told her stories without knowing hers. She listened, like someone who'd learned the value of holding silence. A local high school art teacher invited her to speak at an assembly. She almost declined, then reconsidered. On stage, she stood steady. "I used to think surviving was the goal," she said, "but surviving is just the start. Living comes after." Michael graduated with honors. During the ceremony, he dedicated his speech to her. "She never wanted a stage, but everything I've built stands on her shoulders." Afterward, someone handed Emily a bouquet. She didn't expect it, but she accepted it with both hands and pressed her cheek to the petals. It smelled like peace. In the years that followed, Emily began to fade gently from the public eye, not from neglect, but from natural retreat. She spent more time tending the community garden behind the shelter, more time reading by the window. She wrote letters to women she once mentored, each one personalized, each one folded with care. She kept a folder labeled for later. Inside were notes she hoped Michael would find someday: recipes, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and reflections titled simply, "What I've Learned." When she turned 70, Michael returned from Oregon with news. He had taken a job at a non-profit in their city and would be moving back. Emily didn't say much, but her eyes shone with quiet joy. That fall, Michael brought her to the unveiling of a new mural downtown. It had been painted on the side of a building once used as a juvenile court. The mural depicted a circle of figures: women, children, counselors holding hands in a ring of light. At the bottom, one phrase was painted: "Let no voice be lost in silence." Beneath the quote, "Inspired by the life of Emily Carter." Emily traced the letters with her fingers, then turned to Michael and said, "Let's go get pie." He laughed. "That's all you have to say?" She nodded. "What more is there?" Emily passed away on a quiet Sunday morning 3 years later. There was no announcement on the news, no national moment of silence. But the ripple of her absence was deeply felt. Michael found her at peace in her chair, a shawl over her shoulders, a book folded open on her lap. The window beside her let in the early light. On the side table sat a teacup and a sealed envelope with his name on it. Inside was a short note. "You know what to do. Keep going. Keep helping. Keep listening. I'll be with you in the pauses." At her memorial, former shelter residents spoke quietly. There were no grand eulogies, just stories of moments when she sat beside someone in the dark, offered soup, or said nothing but made someone feel safe. A young woman named Tara, who had never spoken publicly before, stepped up. She said, "Emily once told me the world is full of people yelling." She said the bravest thing is to whisper truth and still be heard. That's who she was, and who I want to be. They buried her in a small garden plot just beyond the shelter. A bench was added nearby. People still visit it not to mourn, but to reflect. One child, passing by with her mother, asked, "Who was she?"